then, I am introducing you. If I can read my scribbling.
And my glasses.
So, welcome everybody to our Sustainable Food Systems Initiative seminar for today. We have Dr. Maria Navarro with us, and she is a very interesting woman, as I'm sure you will find out. She has an undergraduate degree in engineering. And then she worked with the International Center for Advanced Mediterranean Agronomic Studies. So she went from engineering into more agronomy. Then she is also an Aggie, went to Texas A&M, got her PhD, and now she teaches international agriculture, development, and education in our agricultural ag leadership and education and communication department. So it sort of came from very quantitative now over to more social side, which is kind of an interesting journey. So welcome and thank you very much. We're going to hear about a multi-dimensional analysis of global food security today.
Thank you.
Are the lights open?
They're good for me. I don't know.
Awesome.
Okay. So thank you very much. So it's actually good that you said that I came from a different background, because one of the things that I wanted to ask the audience for a second is, how many of you consider you have an academic agricultural background here? Okay, I was hoping for more, because the challenge is one of the things for many of us that have been educated in agriculture. We are told continuously that agriculture is the solution for global food security. We are told that we are responsible for addressing the issue of global food security, and we do believe it. So I want to go a little bit and analyze this idea that we're told over and over and over again that we need to find and we need to feed the world. And I want to see if that really is how we have to see our role in agriculture. So this was called Multidimensional Analysis of Global Food Security. And I wanted to go first to consider, for you to consider what we know about what we know regarding global food security. And I wanted to take an idea that many of you probably have heard. Many of you might have heard about the Irish potato famine. How many of you have heard of the Irish potato famine? Okay. Those in agriculture, I was led to believe that the Irish potato famine happened because, what is it that in agriculture we are led to believe? That the Irish
they grew potatoes over and over in disease.
Okay, and then we had the late blight, the phytophthora infestants. And we had a situation where you have healthy potato, get the phytophthora infestants, and if all you eat is potato and suddenly potato dies or the potato gets sick, we don't have enough potato, and then we don't eat, right? So in agriculture, well, they say in 1846, they lost 3/4 of the harvest to blight. Even in 48, 2 years later, they still have not recovered regarding the harvest. And the resulting thing was that 1 million people died and 1 million emigrated to the United States. So in agriculture, we're told two things. One of them is you need to use this example to show how important it is to do research in agriculture. You need to use this example to show how plant pathology is key for solving problems of hunger, for solving problems of production, for solving problems of society. How many of you have been told at least once, plant pathology is important? Look what happened in Ireland, right? We've been told that. Another thing that I was told, I studied plant genetics and plant breeding. What is the thing that plant geneticists and plant breeders tell us about the Irish potato famine? What is it that they tell us?
You need resistant breeds.
You need resistance. Now, one of the problems that we had is that all the potatoes in Ireland came from 3 original tubers from, where's the origin of potatoes?
Peru.
From Peru. They brought 3, and all the potatoes that they had in Ireland came from these 3 tubers. Therefore, there was no genetic diversity. There was no resistance. Therefore, if you have no diversity, you get the blight, bam, everything dies, okay? So we are led to believe that plant pathology and diversity is the solution. Here, let's see, especially with potatoes, right? If we had this or we had this, surely we will have resistance on the potatoes would not have died, and we wouldn't have had the Irish potato famine. So the origin of the Irish potato famine, I was told, was the blight and was the lack of genetic diversity. How many of you were told this? Come on, come on.
I was told it was the English overlords.
Very good. If we look at this awesome quote, awesome, I think it's an awesome quote by Joe Mitchell, which was a political writer of young Ireland, said, "The Almighty indeed sent us the potato blight, but the English created the famine." So the situation is, yes, the potatoes died of blight. Yes, they didn't know much about plant pathology. We didn't have fungicides. They didn't do, potatoes were so necessary that they planted them very close, so there was no aeration. It was a very humid year. The blight spread like wildfire. Yes, all these things were true, but the truth was that before the potato famine, about 2/3 of the Irish were already in extreme poverty. About 1/3 of the Irish had to move seasonally to other parts of Great Britain to be able to subsist and send some food to their families. Yes, at the time, the Irish were not, they had no rights, they had no education, they had no governance, they had no right to land or to jobs, no right to vote. The tenants owned everything. When the blight came, instead of helping the people, they said, you can't pay, you're evicted from your land. So at the time of the potato famine, Ireland was exporting food to the other islands. So the truth is that, yes, we had problems with the potato, but the potato famine was due to political issues, was due to economic issues, was due to slavery or servitude issues, and was due for a complete lack of responsibility of the government to respond to the situation. Okay, so when we look at the issue of the potato famine, we cannot just look at the obvious agricultural production perspective. We have to look at everything else that is surrounding that idea of the potato famine. Now, do I still think that the blight had a factor? Yeah. But the situation of poverty, the situation of politics, the situation of social issues, the education, the economics, everything had to do with the Irish potato famine. Let's look at another one that seems obvious to many of the people who have heard about it, which was the Bangladesh 1974 famine. Bangladesh 1974 famine came right after a mass flooding of the Brahmaputra River. About 1.5 million people died because of hunger or also because of cholera, malaria, and other waterborne diseases that happened right after the famine. So many people say that in that area, there's a lot of famines that are caused by flooding, okay? Flooding, what happens? There's a society that depends on rice. You flood the area, you flood too much, they lose the harvest of rice, people die of hunger. And we keep hearing that there's lots of places that because of those floodings and because of the extreme weather events and because of our incapability to address those extreme weather events, we keep having famines and problems and things like this. So let's look a little bit of what happened in Bangladesh in 1974. This is again happening in 2011 and 2012. This is 2011 and that's 2012. Those were the floodings of 2012. But let's look a little bit of what happened in 74 in Bangladesh. Why did so many people die because of a flooding? Well, let me tell you, there was enough rice, enough grain in Bangladesh in 1974 for everybody to eat and for everybody to survive. But what happened? What happened is that after the floodings, the government, but does anyone know anything about the government in 1974 from Bangladesh? Any history? Anyone? Go ahead.
It was a newly formed country as well as the government. It was initially secular, but was facing a lot of internal disturbances from the army.
Very good. Perfect. Newly found government. They just had finished a 2.5 years of independence. It was a new, weak government and also quite corrupt. So we have a very weak government that does not really have the power to address a big problem like a flooding. So they want to do something to see, oh my God, all these floods, what's going to happen? There is going to be a lot of black market for rice. That's the first impression, right? These floods, there's going to be a lot of black market. What can we do to avoid the black market? Oh, let's just restrict the movement of rice or grain between districts so there is no black market. Well, what happens? That this district has a lot of rice and this district has no rice. And then it was so difficult to move rice from one district to the other that grain was being smuggled out of Bangladesh for sale. So people in Bangladesh were dying of hunger, but the rice was being taken, smuggled on the black market outside of Bangladesh. So it was essentially a complete mismanagement of resources. So what happens? The price of rice spikes. Bangladesh at the time is also having very large urban populations. Urban poor people depend exclusively on their salary to be able to eat. Price goes up. All the people who were laborers for, not even farmers, people who depended on their salary for food cannot afford the rice. So it was in this case mostly the urban people who died because of the rice spike, but not because there was not enough rice, but because of mismanagement of resources, corruption, and a very weak government. Okay? What would agriculture have done to address that? More rice production, problem would have been the same one. I'll give you one more example. Anyone knows anything about the Great China Famine? We had more than 30 million people die. Okay? I'm going to look at this one the other way around, because you all know that in this one, Mao Zedong, he did so many mistakes. The Great Leap Forward, they messed up the iron, the steel, they did all the communes for agriculture. It was a complete mismanagement of the resources or the people, and politically was a mess, okay? Now, also, we do know that by making the communes of agriculture, all the communes were over-reporting. This graph shows it. All the communes were shooting to the stars and were skyrocketing the report on how much they were producing in agriculture. They were skyrocketing it because they wanted to look good to the party. They wanted to look good on Mao. So they were saying, oh, I harvested 100. Well, I did 200. Oh, I did 300. Oh, I did 10,000. So they were over-reporting how much they were producing. So what happens when you over-report how much you produce? You have to pay taxes for that, right? So if you have to pay taxes, some people, the taxes they had to pay for their supposed production were higher than what they were really producing. So we have all these taxes that are in kind, in food production, that are being moved to the cities. So during the Chinese Great Famine, essentially during the Great Leap Forward, essentially China had enough food, but most of that food was in the cities or in storage to be exported. Now, was anyone purposely starving the people in the rural areas? No, but it was this whole idea of over-reporting that was one of the problems. That was one problem. Another problem was the intent of industrialization that was failed. But another problem, and I want to go to the agriculture, another problem is that sometimes in agriculture we say we need to do more research, we need to address this, we can solve hunger through this solution, when we already have the solution. I want to give the example of China because it's one of the things that I really struggle on. How is it possible that we have knowledge about something and we do not use it? During the Great Leap Forward, one of the things that the policies that they used for improvement of agriculture, so they moved it all into communes, but one of the policies that they used most of the policies were very wrong. But one of the things that they did was what they call the sparrow hunt. The sparrows are eating the grains, so what do? You kill the sparrows, okay? And they had this big, massive movement of people killing all the sparrows. And there were, this big projects of killing the sparrows. What happens if you kill all the sparrows? The insects and the rodents. So there was a big, great imbalance of the system. Now, we knew by the 50s that you can't kill all the sparrows, but they still did it. So that was one of the scientific stupidity mistakes that they made. Another thing that they did was Mao had advisor that was Lysenko, that came from Russia, an advisor for agricultural science. And the advisor was a believer on evolutionist theory, Lamarckism, okay? And he would say, well, if you teach a seed to grow better, it will grow better. And then its descendants will grow better. So what you have to do is sow in very, very, very deep trenches. Then they will grow very, 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 very long roots, and then they'll find water, and then the next generation you'll have plants that can grow very, very, very long roots, and just like the giraffe, right? This animal cannot eat, grow a big neck, and that's it. So they were sowing in big trenches. Another policy of Lysenko was we do not need to use fertilizer because if we teach the seeds not to need fertilizer, the next generation will not need fertilizer. And the same with water. Another thing was the very dense planting. They were planting grain 10 and 20 times more dense than it should, because there was a theory, if we plant denser, we'll have 20, 30 times more production. So they had these policies, they made people plant denser. People were not getting more, but then they were faking it. So they were using very wrong policies and science in the idea of agriculture. So that's another thing that I want to say. Sometimes we think that if we did that, we could have a solution, but the solution is already in the knowledge that we have. And I want to go back there in a minute, okay? So that was for the Chinese famine. Another one that is very clear, and this one I wanted to come at the one that is every year we're going to be finding a famine in Somalia, and we have the issue, everybody, oh, and in China they also had droughts and they also had floods, but it's a combination of everything. I cannot tell you if in the Great Leap Forward it was politics or bad science or over-reporting or the flood or the drought. It was a little bit of everything. We cannot say it was this or that. It was a combination of everything. Now, the same thing in Somalia. In Somalia, you have situations where you have weak government, you have droughts, you have conflict, and you have everything is at the same time. Is it the drought? No. Is it that we are in overcapacity? It is. Is it the policies? It is. It is the weak government? It is. It is the conflicts and the warlords? It is. So it's a combination of everything. It is that we have right now in some areas that we really have people that are over carrying capacity of the land also. So that takes me to what I really wanted to talk about, the dimensions of food security. We need to look at food security in agriculture, in social sciences, in politics, always from a multidisciplinary perspective. We cannot claim that the solution is agriculture. We cannot claim that the solution is distribution. We cannot claim that the solution is politics. We cannot claim that the solution is less waste. We have to have everything together. So last year, a couple of graduate students and I tried to put in one single image our idea on how do we express food security from this multidisciplinary perspective. So we got this image, and I'm going to go slowly in each one of them. The first one is the idea of availability. Do we have enough food available to feed everybody? And that works from an international perspective. It works in Bangladesh, it works in India, and it works in Athens, and it works in Atlanta. Do we have enough food? This idea of enough food, how are we going to have availability of food? Well, we can have availability of food if we have local production. We can have availability of food if we have an exchange capacity, either through a market, local market, or either through exports and imports. Or we could also have availability of food if we have the ability of storage of food, or even in some areas, they can have availability of food because someone sends them food. Okay? So the availability of food is one of the things that people first think when they think about food security or people not eating. I mean, most of you have heard, well, let's send food to a food bank or food aid, or no food aid because it creates dependency. What they have to do is to produce enough food locally, right? We've heard that. Or, well, but if they can have money, then they can import the food. We've heard that. And that availability of food is extremely important. Without the availability of food, we're going nowhere. However, I didn't do it, but I was going to bring some water, and I was going to put it here and keep it here. And I say, hey, there is enough availability of water here, but it's all mine. So you guys are not going to drink it. It's mine. We have enough water in this room, but you guys are not going to drink because it's mine. I'm not going to give it to you. So the fact that there's availability of food is going to do nothing for many people if they are starving. So that takes me to the next one. The next one would be the idea of access to that food. Okay? The idea of access to that food is, do we have access, which would be the physical access to the food? Can I go to the market? Okay? Is there even a market? So do I have transportation to the market? Do we even have the ability for a market? Now, the physical access to food is one of the big problems that we're going to have in the United States regarding the lack of food security, which would be what we call the food deserts. People who do not have that physical or time and physical access to food, to fresh food. That's what we call the food deserts, okay? So do we have this physical access to food? The other one would be, do we have that economic access to food? Can people afford the food that they have available there? For example, if we're thinking about the Bangladesh example that I gave you, there was enough food, but people didn't have physical access to that food because the food was in the district next to them, or the urban people who were depending on their salary, they don't have monetary access to that food because the price of food had spiked up. There was enough food, but they didn't have access. In the case of the Great China Famine, people didn't have access because it was all stored in storage units in urban cities or being exported, because at the time China was exporting quite a lot of grain. The other one would be the opportunity access, or the knowledge access. Some people might not know that there is this availability. I know sometimes people say, why didn't I know that there was free food at UGA once a week? Why didn't I know that we had this opportunity? Why do people don't go to well, they don't go because they don't know about it, or because they cannot transport to there, or because there's other reasons that we'll get there. So this access to food, it doesn't matter how much food there is available, you still have the possibility of not having access to that food, okay? So producing more food or sending food, the expression, the problem is not production, the problem is distribution. I've heard it so many times. But distribution, what is distribution? That you put it in a boat and you send it over there? What does distribution really mean? Do people have access after you have distributed, whatever that means? Okay, so the next one, we have availability and access, and then we have the idea of utilization. And that's another thing that we find very much in the United States. This idea of people having enough money to eat, but they might not have access to that fresh food because they don't have closed markets, but they have a closed McDonald's, for example, okay? And that's very common in the food deserts. We do have the idea of we have enough money to buy that food. I can afford that food, but I don't have access to that food, but I have access to a McDonald's. And the access could be opportunity, could be knowledge, could be the idea of time. McDonald's is open 24 hours. The grocery store next door is not open 24 hours. But the idea of utilization is two things. One of them is the idea of quality, the idea of food quality and diversity. You are not food security if what you eat is not good diet and diverse diet. It doesn't matter how much you eat. If your diet is not adequate, you are not food secure. So we have the idea of utilization because of lack of good diet and diversity of diet, but we also could have issues of food safety. Food safety on the cooking and processing, or even a food safety from the perspective of hygiene and practices from farm to fork. The utilization of food is also part of what we call food security. And I think it's important that we remember that it is part of it, because it's the part that is more behavioral, that is the part that you can really act on by doing education, by doing awareness raising, okay? So these are, these are the many people, you might have heard the 3 pillars of food security. That is many times used, but that's not enough. We cannot talk about food security unless we see the whole picture. And the whole picture has also the idea of stability of supply and access. You might have that availability of food and that access to food and that utilization of food, but just 3 months a year during harvest. So you need to be able to have that stability, or you might have it as long as there is not a flood, or you might have it as long as you don't lose your job. This idea of stability, and I would say maybe year-long, it's extremely important. And the stability is usually something that political issues, conflict issues, and weather events really breaks the stability of access to food. Now, many people might confuse stability, and that's where the literature more or less stops. But you have to go much more. You are not food secure if you only look at the food security in 1 year. You have to look at the long-term sustainability. And I will use sustainability not in an economic or social or food. I will look at sustainability from an availability, from an access, and from a utilization perspective. You do not damage the next generation's ability to have availability, to have access, and to have utilization, proper utilization of food. And then the idea of food politics and sovereignty. Are people actually choosing what it is that they have in their food security? Is that distribution or that access or that availability or that utilization of food fair, just, and secure? Okay? So many people, when they talk about agriculture can address food security, that might be true. We are addressing the availability piece. Okay? We are addressing the availability piece. But if not everybody has access to land, not everybody has access to money to buy food, not everybody has access to knowledge, not everybody has access to proper processing materials, we're not going to solve anything. Okay? So I want everybody to just look at this for 1 minute. Let's say 37 seconds. Okay. And now I want just hands for a minute. How many of you, when you think about food security, think mostly about the availability piece? Okay. How many of you think mostly about the access piece? Okay. How many of you look at the utilization piece? Okay. Most family and consumer sciences might answer this way. How many of you think about the long-term sustainability? I don't care if you can eat tomorrow. I just want to make sure that for generation after generation after generation. But that's the first thought that you think. The long term, Elizabeth, okay? How many of you think about the stability throughout the year, mostly thinking about the conflict issues? And then how many of you think about the food politics, sovereignty, equity, fairness? Okay. Oh, Elizabeth, you have your hands so many times up. Okay, so this is a group that already has been thinking about this. I mean, this is a group that comes here because of these issues. But if you think about how people address, how people talk about these, you will see that usually they just focus on one of them. And I'm not saying everybody focuses on the availability, but you will hear in the narrative that people really focus on one. And I don't want the narrative to go to just availability or to go to just access or to go to just long-term. I just think that the narrative really needs to show the integrated relationship between all of those. And unless the narrative goes to all of those, we do have a problem. One of the things that we hear very much now is that 40% of the food produced is lost, wasted. In some places, it's wasted mostly farm to market, and in some places, it's wasted mostly post-market. So it depends on where you are. The percentage is bigger in one place or another. Well, what does the waste impact? Does it impact availability? Does it impact access? Or does it impact utilization? Which one?
It's all of them.
All of them, okay? So if we focus in food waste, we are really focusing in all of them. In some places, it might be, if it's all wasted at the farm area, it might be more addressing availability. But if you have less food that goes to the market, the prices go up, therefore there is less access from an economic perspective by some, or there is less availability, physical availability, because it doesn't reach remote areas. So if you address transportation waste, you are fixing the issue of access from a physical access. If you address it depends on what type of waste that you're addressing, but you might be addressing one of them. Okay, so sometimes I feel myself that I play devil's advocate, because if I see that someone is addressing availability, and a lot of the people in the College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences focus very much on the availability. Oh, the only way we're going to address hunger is by blah, 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 blah. I have to play devil's advocate and address the issue of access. Some people, social science, they address, oh, if there is enough food, the problem is distribution, and is access. And I say, well, yeah, but if you're not producing, in this case, producing locally, the distribution is not going to be distributed from the United States. So as many people who address access say, there is enough food everywhere. We don't need to do any agriculture because the problem is distribution. Well, yeah, but the food is not going to fly out by itself from one place to the other and solve everything. If you want to address availability, access of food of poor people in a rural area, that's not an access, that's an availability issue. It needs to be local production. Because again, availability is either local production or exchange capacity or storage of food aid. And food aid is not going to be a long-term sustainability of access to food or availability of food, okay? So just think about this. Any discipline that we have to think about, if we think about from an education perspectives need to address availability, utilization, access. I don't believe education perspective needs to address just utilization. I don't believe policy needs to address just access. I don't believe agriculture needs to address just availability. Agriculture can say, well, what can we do so the safety is better? Or what can we do so there is a better physical access to that food, better transportation of the food? So every single discipline has a role in every single dimension of food security. Now, I was told have an hour and then open it for questions.